Welcome to a session on the play The Cenci by Shelley. So, to give you an introduction about Shelley, Shelley, we know Shelley as a lyric poet, as a philosophical poet. There are many different poems of Shelley that we can look into for that particular kind of writing. And we see the moods of ecstasy and despair. So it is more like a binary of ecstasy and despair, happiness and despair that you can find in many of Shelley's works. And there are many different themes that he inculcates in his writings, the most important one being restless brooding, where he is not quite, happy with the things around him. We see there are political commentaries. So there is restless brooding that we see in many of his works. And we see more like a rebellion against, injustice and tyranny. So that exactly is something that you can find in this particular play as well. You can see, places where Shelley has absolutely gone against tyranny and injustice in the characters. You can understand it when we discuss it later. And a few other important themes are, visionary imagination. So if you look into his poems, these are all visionary imaginations or something, visions that you see for the future. So that is also one of his major themes. Then we have ideal love, the concept of ideal love, freedom, and nature. So these are the few recurrent themes that you can find in Shelley's works, which again you can find in the Cenci as well. Then you have interest, his kind of interest that you see of Shelley in science, magic, religion, atheism, radical politics. These are the few other areas where Shelley displays a certain kind of interest. Now, before we start the play, we need to know a few things about the play, what it is about, or what was Shelley actually meaning by writing this play and things like that. So, to understand what Shelley meant or what the play itself means to Shelley, the most important part of the play is the dedication that Shelley has written. So, dedication is something that's before the acts begin, and we have the dedication written in the form of a letter. So, dedication is the dedication titled The Dedication, and it is written in the form of a letter to Leigh Hunt, who was one of Shelley's friends. So, the dedication starts by addressing this friend of Shelley as my dear friend. So Shelley says, so in the dedication, you see how Shelley talks about himself, how Shelley talks about his own notions, his own ideals, and his own concepts or his own opinions about his own works. So Shelley says in his earlier works, these are the words of Shelley himself, visions, his earlier works were mere visions that impersonate his apprehensions of beautiful and just, with defects of youth and impatience. So he himself has criticized his earlier writings, where he says that his earlier writings were not really, in a way, great. They were just imaginations. They were just beautiful, so beautiful and just, imaginations of a beautiful and just society. And he calls it, defects, his earlier works as defects of youth and impatience. And also, he mentions how this particular work of his, the drama, is different from his earlier works since it represents a sad reality painted with colors that his art furnishes. So, these are the words of Shelley himself. He says that this particular work talks about the sad reality itself of the world. Now, when we read the story, you'll see what it is about. And after this, he praises Leigh Hunt, to whom this letter, the dedication was written. One more gentle, honorable, innocent, and brave, one of more exalted toleration for all who do and think evil, and yet himself more free from the evil. So these are the words that Shelley used to describe Leigh Hunt, his friend. Now, what is the preface about? What preface is the opening to this play that we have. So, the preface basically gives us background information about this particular play and the characters. So, one more thing that is quite interesting is that the characters in the play, they are real characters. They were actually alive in Italy, and so what all the events that happened, the play that is happening, it's May 29th, 1819 is the date given. And the preface opens thus, where it is, it goes like this. A manuscript was communicated to me during my travels in Italy, which was copied from the archives of Cenci Palace at Rome and contains a detailed account of the horrors which ended in the extinction of one of the noblest and richest families of that city during the pontificate of Clement the Eighth in the year 1599. So, Shelley gives an introduction, tells us what it is about and how this was actually a real story. That Shelley came across a manuscript that he got to read from or the story that he got to know from the archives of Cenci Palace, which is a real palace in Rome. So it actually happened. The events actually happened during the pontificate of, that is, the Pope of Clement the Eighth in the year 1599. So, to give you a brief historical background of the play itself, Shelley, he proceeds to narrate the historical events that led to the extinction. Why was this family extinct? Cenci family extinct, which captured Shelley's imagination during his visit to Rome. So he got to know that something like this happened, and he further used his imagination, being the romantic play that it is. It further used imagination to exemplify the events that actually happened. So the story was actually handed down orally and documented in Annali d'Italia. So this was the archive from which Shelley himself came across the story, which is actually a 12-volume chronicle of Italian history written by Ludovico Antonio Muratori in 1749. So that was the archive from which Shelley got to read about the story of the Cenci family. So the true story goes like this. In 1519 in Rome, Beatrice is the name of the main character that we have in the play, a young woman who was executed for premeditated murder of her tyrannical father, Count Francesco Cenci. So the story is about a daughter who killed her father. We do not know the reasons. So that is a real story that happened in 1599. He had inhumanly tortured his family, had his sons killed, and finally raped his own daughter, Beatrice. So, this is a very appalling story that we have. This is the real story. The corrupt Pope Clement, who had pardoned Cenci's multitudinous crimes for bribes, the Pope had got bribes from from Cenci, sentenced Beatrice to death despite the popular demand for her pardon. So she was a very supported character, but she was not supported by the Pope. Beatrice Cenci became a famous tragic heroine, and her grave near the altar of San Pietro Montorio in Rome's Gianicolo is a site of pilgrimage for the Romantics. So that is the true story. Now, why did Shelley decide the Cenci to be a closet drama? That's the next question. So, what is closet drama? It is mostly dramas or plays that are not performed. It is just written; those are not performed. So, this is what Shelley himself says. The story of the Cenci is indeed eminently fearful and monstrous. Anything like a dry exhibition of it on the stage would be unsupportable. It's not acceptable to be performed on stage because it will be too hard to handle. The person who would treat such a subject must increase the ideal and diminish the actual horror of the events so that the pleasure which arises from the poetry which exists in these tempestuous sufferings and crimes may mitigate the pain of the contemplation of moral deformity from which they spring. There must also be nothing attempted to make the exhibition subservient to what is vulgarly termed as a moral purpose. Okay, so this, according to Shelley, was a drama which was not to be performed because the content was too gruesome for that. It had to be a closer drama, but eventually it was performed. And what are the moral elements? Further, Shelley elaborates on the moral elements. Revenge is morally a mistake. So Shelley himself is not someone who supports the concept of revenge, but it is Beatrice's decision. In the play, we have Beatrice taking revenge against her father, which is more like a tragic flaw of this particular character, Beatrice. It is in the reader's justification of Beatrice's action and in the horror with which the reader experiences her predicament. So basically, once the reader knows the story about Beatrice, they are in a position where they are going to support her. And next, Shelley claims to have presented the story objectively without any subjective judgment. So, nowhere he says whether Beatrice is right or Cenci is right. It's just subjective judge. He has looked into the story objectively. So, what are the religious elements in this story? That's the final aspect. So, Shelley juxtaposes the Catholic ethos of the story with the Protestant culture of England. So, at that time, for something like that, the corruption and other things to happen was not acceptable. Religion, it pervades the play. You have a very religious villain in the play itself, which in itself is quite different. But religion in Italy is interwoven with the whole fabric of life, where even villains might be rigidly devout. This exactly is what you can see in the play, because you see Cenci himself praying for even after doing gruesome crime. And these are the few aspects, views on poetic language. And this is the last thing that you can look into before starting the play itself, the portrait of Beatrice Cenci. So these are the few monuments that he speaks about, that Shelley speaks about in the preface itself. He speaks about the portrait of Beatrice Cenci. At the same time, he talks about the Cenci Palace itself, which has got many different parts to it. So that is the introduction to the play Cenci. That's all. Thank you.